Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about the amount of money that I spent on books in 2022. I started doing these videos back in 2020 and I originally saw Mari over at My Name is Marina's doing this video, kind of having a discussion about consumerism on BookTube and the pressures that we feel to purchase a lot of books. And so I will have a link to previous versions of this video down in the description as well as up in the cards in case you're interested in checking out the breakdown fully. But it's also been really interesting tracking this information because in 2022 I decided to do a no buy year or a low buy year, really. So kind of seeing the trends of what has happened and what just happened and things like that is always really fascinating to me. I love numbers. I love charts. This is all 100% my jam. Also, I'm someone who keeps a very meticulous budget. I use the app You Need a Budget, which I have talked about before. I freaking love this app. I'll have a referral link in the description in case you're interested in it. But yeah, that's also part of the reason why I'm able to keep such detailed notes on these things, because I track my spending like down to the pennies. So I thought I would start off by giving sort of like the historical information, so to speak. So I have all of my spending from 2017 onwards tracked. So in 2017 and 2018, I estimated that I spent around $400 each year on books. The reason why I say it's an estimate is because the exact number is under $400, but I mentioned this in the first video that I made that in both of those years, I know for a fact that I bought books while on vacation and put it in my vacation line item rather than my general books line item. And after 2018, I decided to change that so that way I could have accurate numbers as to what I was actually spending on books and not trying to hide it in other categories. 2019 is when I saw the first significant jump in my book spending, and that's because in December of 2018 I got a brand new job, and that job basically doubled my income, and so that ended up leading to me basically doubling the amount that I spent on books. So I went from about $400 to $784 spent on books in 1 year. And then in 2020, it dipped a little bit to $615. Looking back, I'm very surprised at how high that number is, considering that, you know, there was a global pandemic and I didn't really leave the house very much. But I do know for a fact that I did like buy a bunch of books online in order to support bookstores while everything was shut down and things like that. So I know that contributed to it, but still very surprising to see such a high number in 2020. And then in 2021, I spent $927 on books, and that was one of the reasons why I decided to do a no buy or a low buy year in 2022. Seeing that I almost spent $1,000 in books is very much a thing that's like, holy cow, that's a decent amount of money. Like relative to all of my spending, like my book spending is still a pretty low percentage, but just like knowing that $1,000 went towards books, I was like, I need to evaluate this a little bit and maybe like take some other things into consideration and think about this a little bit more. And so the question now is, how did I do in 2022? And the answer is pretty freaking fantastic. I only spent $181 on books this year. And honestly, I am genuinely so surprised that this number is this low. I expected under 500 for sure, but not under 200. That's crazy to me. This year I have definitely embraced the library, and I can definitely tell that there's been a mindset shift in how I'm purchasing books nowadays. Like obviously I still enjoy buying books, but I've changed the way that I approach it. Now I approach buying books really in like two different ways. One, I'm either buying something that I've already read from the library and I really, really love it, and therefore I want to add it to my collection. And a lot of times that's what I'm doing when I'm like at bookstores around Chicago and things like that. And then the other thing is that like when I go traveling, then I allow myself to go to bookstores and kind of browse and have fun, but I usually put some sort of limit on myself. This year I also didn't do a lot of traveling, so that also contributed to the number being significantly lower. I only went on one trip. I did go to multiple bookstores on that one trip, but it was again only one trip, so I think that also had something to do with it. Also, I just had like big purchases that I made this year, and so I wasn't putting my money towards books the way that I have in the past. But that's a discussion for a different video. In this video, we're just going to talk about my book spending money. So because I keep pretty meticulous notes, and I purchased a relatively low number of books this year. I thought it would just be fun to see every single book that I purchased. I don't do book hauls on the channel because, one, I personally don't really find book hauls very interesting to watch. I'm like in the minority there. I recognize it because book hauls are very popular on BookTube. People love watching that stuff. But personally, like, I don't think it's very fun to watch people talk about a book that they haven't read yet. And I also don't find a lot of fun in me talking about a book that I haven't read yet, because I think part of the fun is hearing people's insights into a book, not just hearing the jacket copy or rehearing what the marketing people are telling us. Like, I want real insights most of the time, so I don't record book hauls. I also just like don't want to feed into the consumeristic aspect of the internet and the world that we live in. And I think that also like that helps minimize the amount of money that I'm spending on books. And also, I should have prefaced this in the beginning, but like obviously like I'm not trying to be judgmental of like the way other people spend their money. Like, as long as you're not going into debt over this stuff, like, spend your money how you like. If you want to spend $1,000 or more on books every year and you can afford to do so, like, go for it. But I just know for a fact that like I want my priorities to be a little bit different. Like, I don't necessarily want it to be under $200 every year, but I definitely think that there's a happy middle ground in all of this. And I think that middle ground for me is, like I said, just following like my values, like buying books that I've already read after I had checked them out from the library and things like that. Or like when I go on vacation, treating it basically like a souvenir to the different places that I go to. So, on to the books. The first book that I purchased in 2022 was 5 Wounds by Kristen Valdez Quade. This is a book that I read in 2021. I believe it was on my best of list of 2021. I really enjoyed this book a whole lot. And I ended up purchasing this from Madison Street Books here in Chicago, which I really enjoyed that bookstore. And it was one where I was in the bookstore. There were multiple things pulling my attention, but I decided to go for this one because, again, I had already read it and I knew that I loved it. In April of this year, I picked up 2 books. One was Jade City, which was one of the books that we read as part of the Chunky Chapter Book Club, which is my Patreon book club. I am actually really glad that I bought this because I ended up really, really enjoying this book. And I'm currently in the middle of the second book right now, and I'll probably end up buying the whole trilogy. But yeah, I decided to pick up a copy of the book since we were reading it for the book club. The other book that I purchased from Barnes & Noble was Sorry Not Sorry, which is probably the one regret that I have this entire year in terms of book purchases, because that was not a good book. I ended up DNFing it. I picked it up because I was at the bookstore with my friends and they were like, let's do a book club together. And I'm like, sure, why not? And so we ended up picking up this book. All of us hated it. It was a very terrible experience, but it was also very fun to talk about afterwards about how much all of us hated this book. In June, I picked up 2 books. The first one is The Bread the Devil Need by Lisa Allen Agostini. This book I picked up because I was reading through the entire Women's Prize shortlist, and this was the only book that my library didn't have available. I believe like at the time it had just gotten released in the United States, or maybe wasn't even released yet in the United States, but I bought a copy online so that way I could read the entire shortlist. I also spent money on the ebook version of this because the physical version did not come through in time for me to read it before the winner was announced, and so I ended up just buying an ebook copy of it as well, and it was just like, it's fine. It was for a video. It's fine. And then the other book that I purchased with that one was Hench. And this is one that I also read in 2021 and I really, really enjoyed. Like, I'm really hoping this author comes out with more stuff, particularly in this world, because like the way the book ends, it like leaves it open enough that there could be more, but it closes it off as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and so I decided to just throw this one in my cart since I was buying books anyways. And the rest of the books that I have here are all books that I bought when I went on vacation. I went to San Francisco and Napa Valley, that sort of Northern California area, for my friend's birthday, and we went to quite a few bookstores while we were there. So we ended up in Santa Cruz and we went to 2 bookstores there. The first one is called Bad Animal, and there I picked up Vengeance is Mine, All Others Pay Cash by Eka Kirinawan. This is a book that is translated by the Indonesian by Annie Tucker. I've read other books by this author before, and Bad Animal is a used bookstore, and so when you're at a used bookstore, you never know what you're going to come across. And so this one was there, and I was just like very surprised to see it there, because like this is such a like small press work in translation, so like what are the chances of coming across it at a used bookstore? And so it just felt a little bit like fate. So I picked this one up, haven't read it yet. And then the other bookstore that we went to was the Santa Cruz bookstore. That's literally what it's called. And that bookstore is fantastic. Highly recommended if you're ever in the Santa Cruz area. And there I picked up Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Rufang. This is another one where I just browsed the whole bookstore, just seeing what popped out to me. This one stood out to me. It seemed like it had pretty good reviews on Goodreads, and so I decided to just kind of like take a chance on this one. Again, haven't read this one yet. And then while we were in San Francisco, we went to Green Apple Books, which, if you aren't aware, has both a used and new book section. And so I ended up picking up 3 books while I was there. The first one is Down the Rabbit Hole by Juan Pablo Villalobos, and this one is also translated by Rosalind Harvey. This is a book I read years ago. I'll see if I can find like the review or video where I talk about this book or this novella, but this is such a fantastic story. I never saw this in bookstores before, and I kept meaning to pick it up, and then I just came across this in the used books section of all things. So I was like, I have to get this one. Then I picked up The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne, because this was also one of the picks for the Chunky Chapter Book Club, and I knew when I was on that trip that this was going to be the pick, or that this was most likely going to be the pick. I think the poll was still going, but it was in the lead. And so this was also in the used book section. I was like, well, I have to get this one. And then the book that I read that was new to me at that point is The Next Great Migration by Sonia Shah. This one I have already read. I read this for Nonfiction November. And so, yeah, I all of those books that I bought, I already read. How fantastic is that? And the final bookstore that we went to on that trip, and the final books that I've bought this year, were from City Lights book, because if you're in San Francisco, you have to go to City Lights. And so I bought 2 books that I haven't read yet, both of which were ones that I hadn't seen in bookstores before, but they look super intriguing, and so I picked them up. The first one is The Bonefire by an author that I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it's also work in translation. That's also, I believe, like a fantasy book or something along those lines. I don't know. The cover intrigued me. The synopsis intrigued me. It seems really interesting. I'm excited to check this one out. And then the other one is Mother Country by Jacinda Townsend. I'd never read anything by this author before, but I'd heard good things about her previous book, Saint Monkey. And so, again, synopsis sounded interesting, cover caught my eye. Very excited to check this one out. So yeah, those are all of the books that I purchased in 2022, which is really crazy to think about. Also, like, the amount of books that's here, like, that used to be a normal, just like single month book haul for me. Look at the growth. So yeah, I'm really happy with the way my 2022 went. Like I said before, like, I don't expect every year to be at this number. I have like sort of refined the way I think about my book buying and things like that. There's 2 sort of metrics that I look at. The first metric that I look at in terms of money is like, how much am I making on YouTube, and is my book spending under that? Because then it just feels like I'm basically like putting money back into the channel, so to speak. The second metric that I look at is like how long books are sitting on my physical TBR. So if I'm reading books faster than I'm buying them, then that's a good metric. But also, just in general, my rule of thumb now is to have books on my physical TBR for under a year if possible. And it's like, once things start piling up and things get on the list for longer than a year, that's where trouble hits. Also, I should say, like, this is not all of the books that I received in 2022. I have gotten books as gifts, I have gotten books as publishers, but in my head, those are things that I can't necessarily control. And what I can control is the amount of books that I'm spending my own personal money on. So yeah, overall, I would say that 2022 was a huge success in terms of my book buying. And yeah, we'll see how 2023 will go. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions or comments on anything that I talked about here in this video. If you are someone who tracks your own book buying or book spending, however you want to think about it, let me know down in the comments below how 2022 was for you, or if you have any goals around book buying and book spending in 2023, let me know what that is as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.